We are really glad having and Dr. Julia with us, and it's really a great opportunity for Somalis to have her. And first, I will introduce her, and then I will hand over to Dr. Julia for giving a lecture. And after the lecture, there will be a question and answer session. Whatever questions you will have, you will ask her. So while the lecture going on, if any question come to your mind, please write it down. And in the end, either you will ask the question and directly, or you can write in the chat box. So, and let me introduce Dr. Julia to you. I think it will not be fair to introduce her with 1 minute or two, but let me try just to give her a bit the major things which she is involved. She involved so many things. Dr. Julia, she is the leading expert in a social influence of mental health. She is a TEDx and a speaker on social support and social and connectedness. She is a researcher which mainly focuses on a behavioral health field. She frequently invited international events and platforms, and she shared her knowledge. She mainly focused on how we can collectively support each other and how the harmonization between the societies and the people. And she is the CEO of and the founder of collectively an organization which mainly supports for the people to come together and to form a community which support each other. She is also an adjunct professor at the University of in Southern Florida, and she is by profession a public health and a specialist. So we are really and glad having Dr. Julia with us. She is really a very good supporter on us, giving her time and also willing to support, as she supported so many other community, whether they are in a developed world or whether they are in underdeveloped world. So let me not take much time and give the floor to Dr. Julia. Dr. Julia, welcome, and we are really thanking you for giving us your time and your expert. Welcome, Dr. Julia.
Thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction. So we're going to be spending the next hour and a half or so talking a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is really how to build community. I'll tell you, think that was an amazing intro, and I'll just share a little bit more about myself. I am a mother of three boys, three young men, and I live in the state of Florida in the United States. I started off as a therapist many, many years ago, And when I was working in the mental health field, I became really frustrated because I felt like people would come in to get treatment and support, but the interventions were short-lived and people would still be struggling. And so I wanted to learn a little bit more about how do we get ahead of this problem? How can we prevent people from having mental health conditions as opposed to being reactive and providing therapy after they're already struggling? So I went back to school and I got I became a doctor of public health, which focuses a lot on the prevention and as opposed to necessarily the interventions. And so from that perspective, when you can begin to talk about like what are the things that we can do to stop people from needing mental health treatment in the first place, really we can make an impact. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit about some of the research that I do. And then I've done a little bit of research about your community and how to address mental health within your community. I do have some activities to share with you, so you'll have a chance to do some individual work, and then I'll share some resources. And so this data is related to the United States. However, I was speaking with Dr. Dowd before, and really, it sounds like many of the issues that you guys are struggling with are the same issues that are global issues, not just US issues. So I am in the United States, and in the United States, there's this recognition that there is a national crisis around social isolation. But as that turns out, that is actually an international and global crisis, and the World Health Organization has created a special committee just to focus on how do we address this loneliness and isolation epidemic that's happening around the world. So these data are they are US, but they're relevant everywhere. And I think it's important to kind of set the stage about why we need to talk about how important it is to build community. So when you look at these data, you notice that our social isolation numbers are way up. More people are spending time by themselves, right? Also, when it comes to what happens within your home, within your family, we spend less time in our homes and in our families. When it comes to companionship, so one-on-one relationships, we spend less time in companionship. When it comes to spending time with friends in person, we spend much less time in relationship and in with our friends. When it comes to spending time with our extended family, so people maybe who don't live in our home, but aunts, uncles, cousins, relatives outside of our primary home, we spend less time in our families. And then just social engagements with other in general, we spend less time. And so all of these numbers have been steadily decreasing. These you can tell that these data are pre-COVID, right? So this is something that's been happening in our world for a while. COVID just made the problem worse. It exacerbated the problem, but we were already going in this direction of all of these things. So this is a chart that talks about how much time we spend with friends. And you can see that the numbers have steadily decreased. It's also important to recognize that every age group is here. We think it's our young people who are really struggling, or maybe our elderly, but in fact, it's all of us that are on this call today that are struggling because all of the numbers are going down. And again, this was pre-COVID. You can just see that COVID made it a little bit worse there towards the end, but it was already going in that direction. The one thing I want to point out is this gray line right here in the middle of the slide. Because this is really this is the beginning of the trending line, where you can notice that the trend is going downwards. So that is kind of statistically significant, the changes that are occurring around that time. And then paying attention to that same date, this slide represents suicide, self-poisoning, major depressive symptoms, and those numbers are going way up. Right. And those numbers are going way up around that same trending line, which is important and interesting information. And then come to think about like, okay, well, what happened around 2012 that perhaps is making those lines go down? And the data really leads to it was when the smartphone became readily available. So we have to recognize that has an impact on us. If you think about all of those earlier trends that were going down, a lot of them are related to, or could be related to, the smartphone. So less family engagement. I don't know how many of you guys have been sitting in your home with other human beings, but you're all sitting on your phones or on your computers instead of interacting with each other. How many of you in your primary relationships or just in the middle of having a conversation with somebody and you get your phone dings, you automatically just start paying attention to your phone instead of the person who's right in front of you. When it comes to engaging with friends, we engage with friends differently than we used to. You can see a whole group of young people sitting around with their phones in their hands, not talking to each other, but each engaged independently on their phone, but sitting next to each other, right? And so this phone, and my whole presentation is not about phones. This is just one challenge that we're dealing with at a global level. But this access to immediate gratification and information through things like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat really is a distraction from creating community. Okay. So what's happening here besides the phone, right? So technology is just one of the issues, but there are many other issues. Also, and I can speak to America, though I imagine you have similar challenges here. Right now in the US, we're having a big issue politically in terms of being able to trust other people. And there seem to kind of be like two sides of the camp, and there really, you're either for one thing or against one thing, and it creates a big divide. And so if I don't know where you land politically, I'm not likely to have a conversation with you because I'm not really interested in getting myself worked up or upsetting other people. So we just avoid confrontation and communication because we're not sure where the other person lies politically. So that creates a lack of connection. Also, our close friendships are declining. There's data that says that, in the 1990s, we had what we call 4 deep ties or strong ties, and now we have 2. So our inner circle is smaller than it's ever been. Those deep ties are the people when I'm having a rough day or I really need something, that person's going to be there for me. And when our numbers decrease, in that space, we have to work to get those numbers back up because we need to have people around us that we can trust when we need help. Also, participation in religious and faith-based community has significantly decreased. This is something, again, these are US data. However, from what I understand, this is a global challenge with changes in the way that we pray. And even, for example, COVID is something that was a contributing factor to this because pre-COVID, people were attending church at a higher rate, though the numbers were already declining. But then when COVID happened, we couldn't be together in community, in our faith communities for safety reasons. And then post-COVID, or as we could get back to it, it was just easier not to. It was easier if you had access to, say, like a Zoom or an online, faith practice, to just continue that because it was just easier. But what happens is when we don't get together as a community, it's that after the service where we really connect, whether you celebrate through food or through dance or through just conversation with others. And when we're not even getting together for that faith community, then we don't have the opportunity for that other part that is actually really important for creating community, which is what we're talking about today. Also, workplaces, many of them tend to be virtual or still have a virtual or hybrid, and that lack of access to spending time with people in human form is something that has also been part of what our challenge is when it comes to creating community. So what if I told you that I have, the secret sauce for this, that I have a solution, that if you use my sauce, you will actually live longer. The research demonstrates that you'll live 3.67 years longer if you use this sauce. Also, you'll have less stress in your life because using the sauce will trigger the release of stress-reducing hormones in your body. You'll have better cardiovascular disease and a reduced risk of better cardiovascular health, a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. You will be healthier and you won't get sick as often. You'll have less risk of substance use, less risk of mental health conditions, including depression and anxiety. You actually think faster when you use the sauce. And so these are all incredible benefits of the sauce. And so if you think, well, what would that sauce be? I think, people will say it's diet, it's exercise, something to that effect. But in reality, what the sauce is social connections. It's spending time with other people, spending time with your friends and your family in human form without the distractions of the phone, and just being in community with people. And when we don't use the sauce, we have increased risk of heart disease it has the physical effects on our body as though we were smoking 15 cigarettes a day, even when we don't smoke. It also increases our risk for dementia and slows our brain functioning when we're not in community and in connection with others. It's worse for our body than if we were experiencing obesity, and there's an increased risk of anxiety and depression when we don't use the sauce, right? When we're not spending time in community with others. So I want you to just take a moment. When I do presentations, I really love to have people just take some time to do some activities and some introspection. And so I would like for you just to take a moment and talk about, who are your social connections? And here are some prompting questions for you. So when you think about who do you work or go to school with, who would you really consider yourself connected with in that space? When you think about who lives in your neighborhood, who are you connected with? Which neighbors do you connect with? I always joke that, in the US, people don't really connect with their neighbors unless there's some kind of like a crisis happening, whether it's a hurricane. I live in Florida, and so we have a lot of hurricanes here. And really, the main time that you connect with your neighbors is when there's a hurricane, and which is just so incredibly sad, but true. Think about your friend circle. Who do you connect with in your friends? Like, who do you feel like you can really speak with? Okay. Also, who were the last three people to come to your home? And think about, you know, who was it that came to your home, who stopped by, whether it was expected or unexpected, who was there, and how are those people part of your support system or part of your community? And then another one is, who do you pray with? Right. So if you do pray, or when you do pray, are you praying in community or are you praying solo? So let's just take a moment to think about those. So I'm wondering if you had a chance and had some awareness to think about, like, either you know what, I do all of these things with people, or a lot of people, or maybe you had the recognition that, everywhere I go, I really don't spend time with others, or I don't have that connection with others. And so I think it's important, this self-awareness about how we enter into community with others, so that we can share this information and this, this with other people. So I invite you to be aware of what you identified here, and think about, are there areas where you would like to increase the amount of people that you spend time with, or the amount of connections that you have. So I wanted to share this slide because it's important data about happiness, right? Which is, we strive for contentment or for happiness. And I think it's important for us to recognize how much of this we actually have some control over. I think oftentimes we feel like we don't have control over a lot of things, but we actually have more control than we realize. And so on this slide, you see that 50% of your happiness is what we call your genetic set. So that is, um, whether you are a glass is half empty person or a glass is half full person. So if you see a situation and you automatically think the worst, then you tend to be a very realistic and a glass is half empty person. And if you see a situation and it's up and you see it in a positive way, where you can find the positives in it, then you tend to be a glass is half full person. And there's not a right or a wrong. It's just the way you view the world and this awareness of the way you view the world. And then this 10% of our happiness comes from our life circumstances, right? It comes from where we live, the environment that we live in, the family that we live with, the people that we're surrounded with. And in this sense, we don't have that very much to do about this. Like it is what it is, right? The same as when you're born with a certain outlook. You can change that outlook, but it's really difficult to because it's kind of like ingrained in who you are. So this life circumstance part, it's ingrained in who you are. For the most part, that 10% of our happiness comes from that. But what this shows is that this light green part or light blue part here shows that 40% of our happiness is really based on our own control. Like we have the ability through our everyday actions and choices to determine how happy we can be. By 40%, we can increase our happiness by 40% just by the everyday things that you do. And so it's important when we're thinking about like how do we address mental health through community, knowing that we actually do have some agency. We have the ability to impact this. So the data shows us that the happiest people in the world, one is they devote time to family and friends. So they spend time in community. That's the number one indicator of a happy life is having connection and community. Also, the happiest people are comfortable expressing gratitude. So even when things are not so great, they can find something positive and they're comfortable saying, thank you or that was helpful. Also, they're the first people to offer a helping hand when somebody needs help. And so altruism, doing something nice for somebody else, is really helpful when it comes to being happier. Practicing optimism and imagining that things will get better in the future is an important aspect of creating a happier life, right? Not thinking about the negative, but thinking about the positive. Another is living in the present moment and being present. So not thinking about all the things that you have to do and all the bad things that are happening, but right here, right now, looking around you and recognizing something positive, or finding something that you can just stay grounded in and be present. Also, exercise is a big one because exercise, when our bodies, we do get stressed out, and exercise is a way to release that stress. So it's, daily exercise does create a happier life, whether it's just going for a walk or intensive exercise. And then having a goal, so having something to think about in the future is also an important way to create happiness. So looking at this is just another quick little activity for you to do. I want you to recognize that we can change the way we look at things. So, for example, if you have a piece of paper, that would be really great to grab a piece of paper right now, and then draw a line just down the middle of the paper, if you will, just a line all the way down the middle. And on the top of one side, you just write the word negative, and then on the top of the other side of the line, write the word positive. And I'm going to just tell you a couple of scenarios, and I want you to think about something that's happening in your life and think about something bad related to that and something good related to that. So, for example, how am I doing at school or at work? So, for me, something bad that I would say, how am I doing I would do work because I'm not in school right now. So, something bad that's happening for me in my workspace is that with a lot of the political changes that are happening over in the US, I've lost a lot of my government contracts. So I'm not able to do the research that I've been working on for a while, some of the research that I've been working on for a while. Something good that's happening is because I am not so deep into all of that research, which is very time consuming, I've been able to free up my schedule a little bit. And for us, it's summertime right now. My kids are home for the summer from college. So I get to spend time with my family that I would normally would be just, reading and writing and researching. And I have a little bit of extra space to spend time with my family, right? So the bad, but also the good. So you think about with your school or your work situation, what's something negative that's happening, but also what is something positive? Okay, for the next one, think about how are you doing in your relationships? So something negative that's happening in my relationship and something positive that's happening in my relationship. So I would say for me, when it comes to my relationships, again, some of the political stuff that's happening, I can't talk to people about some of the political stuff that's happening. So some of my close relationships have changed because we have different beliefs. But the positive, that's a negative. The positive is that I have found a nice community of people who feel exactly the same way I do. And they feel that it's difficult to talk to people with different beliefs. And we meet on a regular basis to be in community with each other and to support each other in some of our beliefs. And I never would have been part of that group had I not had to, decrease the amount of time I spend with some people. The next one is financially. So what's a negative about financial and what's a positive about financial? So for me, a negative about financial, I mentioned that a lot of my contracts ended. That's definitely a negative. So that is a negative. And so a positive, though, is that it's allowed me to be a little creative in the ways that I do things. And also, normally during the summer, we try to travel a little bit. And this summer, we're really not going to be traveling, which means that my family will be doing things together at home, which is a nice change to be able to just kind of stay put. All of my children went and got jobs or are in the process of getting jobs, which is a beautiful thing because I'm teaching them some responsibility. And so I'm grateful for that too. So you can see that negative things could be happening, but there could also be positive sides to it. And so the question, I think, is what's the difference between the negative column and the positive column? Like what has changed that makes you go one way or the other? The answer really is just your perspective. The only thing that's changed is the way you choose to look at something. The situation is exactly the same, right? There's still the bad things are still there, the good things are still there. I can spend all my time in the negative space and experience anxiety and depression and all of those things. Or the exact same situation could happen, but I could just allow myself to think about the positive side to it. Nothing's going to change. The bad stuff's still going to be there. But when I think about the positive, I'm not experiencing the anxiety and the depression. Now, if you're somebody who's experienced significant trauma, you need real support, through therapy or medication or, there's so many different methodologies. And though you also need to engage activities like this to make sure that you're focusing on those positives instead of allowing yourself to stay in the space of the negative. And so we do have control over a lot. It's 40%. The data says 40%. But it takes us intentionally focusing and practicing in order to make sure that we're utilizing these techniques. And I'm going to share with you some of the techniques that I use in my research. So, from the US perspective, and this is the Surgeon General of the United States, previous Surgeon General of the United States, was really focusing on social connection because he himself experienced loneliness and isolation as a young person. And now seeing the data, realizes this is a national epidemic, though, as I mentioned, it's also a global epidemic. And so in the US, what they've done is created these 6 pillars, right? And so these pillars really result in cultivating individual health and well-being, strengthening our communities and our community health and safety and prosperity, building resilience for the next challenge, because there's always going to be a next challenge. We know this. And then engaging in civic and policy level change. And so all of these different aspects of how we can create better connections are included in this, like 100 and something page report by the Surgeon General. And so the way that he has laid out this framework for us is that we want to strengthen social infrastructure within communities. We want to create policies or enact policies that promote connection. We want to mobilize the health sector to focus on building connections and talking about mental health. We want to reform digital platforms so that we're not using them as much. You can't use them at such a young age because our brains are not fully developed. We want to deepen our knowledge around connection and the benefits of connection, which you guys are doing today. So kudos to you. Then we want to build a culture, an overall culture of connection. And so that is the framework that the US Surgeon General has laid out. For the research that I've done for you guys in terms of community solutions for Somaliland, these are some of the aspects that will help build connection around and support, what the mental health challenges that you guys are experiencing. So the first one is around stigma and silence about mental health. So I think it's a recognition that, everybody is struggling at some level. So how do we address that? How do we talk about the struggles that we're having? Also, the recognition that we have many strengths through cultural and religious outlets. And so recognizing that when we use those, we continue to build community, which is what our goal is, right? To educate people about community and the need for community and how to enact community. Also to create spaces, safe spaces for support and to create those support networks, to empower our young people and educate them about how they need to focus on connection more than they have been. Many of our young people, especially this current generation, which we call the alpha generation, they've grown up with the smartphones and technology, and so they communicate differently than other generations. Improve local access to help and support, and some of the data, from Somaliland, that there are in the public health system, there are only 4 psychiatrists, things like that. That's important information for us to be aware of so that we know how to increase when we need to talk about and create support during crisis and trauma. And certainly there's been a lot of crisis and trauma in the recent past with wars, and then also create policies and funding. So I've broken these down a little bit to give you some greater ideas. So one is breaking the silence and stigma, and looking at this picture and recognition that, mental health is not necessarily accepted, or that mental health is criminalized. That's something that happens in the US. In the US, the largest provider of mental health services is the jail system. And with all the community mental health providers, all the doctors, psychiatrists, therapists, community health workers, everything, the largest mental health provider in the US is our jail system. And so that's something that happens, I think, worldwide. I really feel like it comes from a space of we don't know how to help people. We want to keep them safe from themselves, and we want to keep the community safe from them. And so it seems like, well, okay, let's keep that safe and let's keep us safe. But in reality, the human rights are not being recognize there. So some of the mental health challenges that are common, recognizing that everybody has mental health challenges. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not binary. You're either mental health or mental well. It really is more of a continuum. And some days I'm having a good day, and some days I'm not having such a great day. Some of the cultural misconceptions that, community education is so important when it comes to mental health. And then speaking openly about it to promote healing. Another solution is to recognize the use of cultural and religious strengths. And so this is so important to know that, the belief systems and the faith is the most important space for creating community in many countries. And so when you get together to celebrate, to pray, you are also then in community with people, and you have the opportunity to connect and talk and support each other. And so getting back to our faith, I've worked on projects where we train, in communities where there's a large Christian population, and we've actually trained the pastors about mental health so that they can then, through their scripture, share information and knowledge about mental health. So that the people their parishioners that come to pray know that it's okay to talk about it because my pastor was talking about it. And so educating people through the religious organizations about, how mental health is part of health. It's mental health, physical health, and that there are multiple ways to address this. But for what I'm talking about, just by virtue of being in community, improves people's mental health. So just by virtue of connecting to that faith community, it will improve. You will feel that you have people to talk to if you need somebody to talk to. Having said that, I recognize that, that's a difficult task, right? And so any way that you feel that we can, maybe in our youth groups or with the younger generation, begin to talk about that. Many of the, in the US, many of the pastors were not promoting mental health prior to COVID. And that became a turning point for people because all of a sudden, many, many more people were experiencing mental health challenges. And the pastors themselves became overwhelmed that they couldn't meet the needs. So they really were open to suggestions about how we can improve mental health. And that sense of creating community is really important. So educating the community, teachers, parents. In the US, we have programs that teach barbers about mental health so that when you go to get your haircut, they're comfortable talking to you. They're doing check-ins to say like, okay, how are you feeling today? How's your day going? Right. And just that sense of being in community with somebody, the people who, if women get their nails done, the nail techs, right? So the people we see them on a regular basis, but educating them about mental health so that they can check in with their patrons is really important, and as well as teachers, so that teachers can kind of like a great line of defense is the prevention, right? So if a teacher sees that a child's not really acting well, helping them understand what they can do about it, and how they can get the support before just allowing it to continue to build up. We want to really empower our youth, right? Our young people, they are experiencing anxiety. Many of them are experiencing depression. A lot of it has to do with the fact that this phone here is what we call their third place. So they have home and they have school, but they don't have that other space. For many, it was the faith community, but if they're not participating in faith community, are they engaged in sports? Are they part of a team? Are they part of a club at school? Do they do extracurricular activity? How are they connected with others besides just their home and just their school? Or or their work if they're working, right? And so getting them involved with others who have like-minded views. So if I like art and I now am part of a club or a class that is teaching art, I'm talking to other young people who also really like art. So I'm going to feel connected to those people and they're going to become part of my community. But if I'm just sitting at home on my phone all day and not going to soccer, or football, and not going to, my art class, or my poetry class or whatever it is, because I'm just busy on my phone and it's easier to just sit around and do that, but I'm not in community, which then ultimately impacts my mental health, right? So we really have to get our kids out there. Also, recognizing that we want to improve local access to support, and that doesn't just mean through professionals, right? I'm going to share with you an example of a project that's done in Zimbabwe where it's teaching community members to support each other. And so we do have things like community health workers or mobile units, but we need to train them more on mental health and also the integration of mental health and physical health. So when you go to see the doctor, if they're checking in and asking you how you're doing, how you're feeling with your mental health, then we can kind of get ahead of it to make sure that there's some support. Support during crisis and trauma, recognizing that trauma impacts, our mental health significantly. And when we, can bring humanitarian aid, then include psychosocial support in that when possible. And also recognizing that different communities experience trauma and loss in different ways. So if you are somebody who's a single mom, or you're a child whose parents are no longer alive, when you experience stress or something else that happens in your life, that makes it even more difficult for you to address because you don't have those resilience, you don't have that support system. And that's why it's great to build community, is because then we have the support system that we need when things are difficult, right? Because if they are sometimes difficult, and we really want to focus on policies and funding, which is much easier said than done. But from a civic perspective, if we can advocate for, a national mental health policy or something like that, there's a greater likelihood that we'll be able to have more resources available. So the last one that I wanted to talk about, and then the rest of the presentation will really be related to this, is creating safe spaces and support networks, which is really creating that community. And so we want to, whenever possible, create peer groups for caregivers. Like I mentioned to you, so I'm struggling with some political stuff. I have this peer group of friends that believe the same way. And that space has really been helpful for me when I'm struggling, right? And so if it's through faith-based community, if it's through friendships, if it's through, moms who have young children, then getting the young children together so that they can play, but then the moms have the support of each other. And, doing that on a regular basis. So you have that kind of check-in to make sure that you have support when you need it. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about this project called Friendship Benches. It is something that was created in Zimbabwe. It's been researched through Harvard University at the US. And it was created to solve the gaps in access to mental health care. And basically what it is, it's like a 7-week program that you just meet once a week. And grandmothers are actually trained to implement the program. Grandmothers in the community are trusted. They also have a little extra time on their hands in many cases. And as you get older, it's really important to have a sense of purpose. Once you've raised your family, like, what do you do every day? And so it's having this sense of that you can help other people through difficult times is just a beautiful thing. And so these grandmothers are trained in problem-solving therapy, which is a really kind of like solution-focused. And they literally sit on a bench and right outside usually health clinics. And so anybody who's struggling or just wants somebody to talk to can just come and sit next to this trained grandmother, and get some mental health guidance because she's been trained how to be supportive, and to recognize when somebody needs more than perhaps her intervention and help them get connected when somebody's really struggling. And so the program has been really successful. It's been in operation for many years. And the most recent data from a study was from 2017. Over 30,000 sessions were provided, in over 70 communities. So it's a very easy program to implement in terms of it just requires, some money for the initial training, but then it's sustainable and it's something that can last in your community. And that's a beautiful way to build community. So the grandmothers that are all trained together, they now have a sense of purpose and mattering and belonging because they are a community unto themselves. But then they're also providing support for people that are struggling, and they can make connections with those families that are struggling, which then creates a community in that space as well. And so I just want to share this program with you because it's something that is available to learn more about, and a really value added, easy to access, easy to use intervention, that helps the grandmothers feel really important, but it also provides the mental health support that we're lacking in the community. So I want to share with you a little bit of my kind of original research around the social influences of mental health, to talk a little bit about how we can do this, what control we have over this. And so my research is around social connections, social support, social capital, social media, and social inclusion. And through the 9 elements of connection and support, I'm going to kind of walk you through how we actually have control over building this community and creating this community. And it really does start with us being aware. Okay, so the first one is intentionality. And intentionality means that when you decide you want to do something, you put your effort and your energy towards it, your intentions towards it, you can actually make it happen. So if I did that activity a little bit earlier, where I was saying who were the people that came to my house, who am I connected with, my friends, with my work, who do I connect with during prayer? When I did that activity, I realized maybe I've gotten away from connection a little bit, or I'm not feeling as connected as I would want to. So with intentionality, I can recreate those connections. I can say, okay, it's a Friday, and so the weekend is coming. And so what am I going to do tomorrow to spend time with a person in human form, not on the phone and not on my phone, not speaking on my phone, not texting on my phone, not on social media? Where can I go to be around other people and to spend time with others? Or say you were really wanting to pick up a new hobby, because when we have hobbies, that increases our level of happiness. What class can I take tomorrow? Or what sporting event can I go to tomorrow? Right? So with intentionality, and it kind of hold yourself accountable for doing it, you can improve your mental health. The next one is proximity, and recognizing that we build community based on where we live, work, play, and pray. And so who are the people around you that could potentially become more of a community for you, or you can create that connection with, right? So the theory of proximity says that when you live or work near people, they tend to be more supportive, right? They tend to be more part of your community. So, but look around you, right? Look around you at work. Who are the people you come across at work? Or look around you at school. Who are the people that you come across at school? Look around you in your neighborhood, and be intentional about, okay, these could be potentially my people. So let me figure out what I can do to create more of a support system around that, right? That proximity will help. Also connectivity, right? So you meet somebody and you're just like right away, I feel like I really connect with this person. That's a beautiful thing. So how can we lean in on that and recognize that, yes, some people, we do have this the kind of energetic connection with them, and we want to be able to build more of a community through that, right? Commonality, and we've spoken to this already. If I like football and you like football, hey, let's meet at the field. We're going to play football together. We'll get to know each other by that common interest, whether it's a sports team that you like, whether it's music. If you like going to certain concerts or you like a certain kind of music, then spending time with people who like that kind of music is very beneficial for building community, right? And we can do that as well. Another one is vulnerability, and this is just the ability or our willingness to talk about something that might be a little bit difficult for us to talk about. Maybe disclose that, yeah, I'm having a bit of a rough day, right? And when we can do that, that builds connection, right? So those moms that have young children getting together and watching your children play, and then being honest with each other that like motherhood is really hard. And I'm really tired. I wish that I wasn't so crappy with my children or whatever that may be, right? But that vulnerability of recognizing how you're feeling with others and sharing it makes and builds community, right? So if you've been through something challenging and you're willing to talk about it with others, that brings you closer. It's hard for us to be vulnerable. It takes a risk, especially about mental health when you live in a community where mental health is not really as supported. It's hard to acknowledge it, but maybe you don't have to say I'm having mental health issues. Maybe you can say I'm feeling a little sad today, right? Just being aware of like I'm kind of in a bad mood, I'm kind of feeling down, right? And that recognition helps build kind of community. So dependability is something that's really important for community. And I think we've gotten away from this a little bit. Part of it has to do with the phone, because our world is virtual. So a complete stranger is going to say that they like me, but it says on my social media platform that they're my friend. And so that's very interesting use of language because I don't even know who this person is, right? And so we can't depend on people that we consider our friends. And so we have to really be intentional about teaching our young people what it means to be dependable. That if they say they're going to do something, they need to do it, and not to use the technology to get out of being dependable. You can just, quickly send a text saying, yeah, I'm not coming, not realizing how that's impacting the other person. Right. So recognizing that when we have rituals and traditions and scheduled activities, and those are scheduled, those are happening on a regular basis, that builds dependability. When I'm trying to get people to go participate in new activities, I will tell them you have to go at least 4 times because the first time you're going to feel really uncomfortable. The second time, you'll still feel a little uncomfortable. The third time, you feel more welcomed. And then by the 4th time, these are your people, right? And so you have to give it that try of going through the uncomfortable part of it to get through to the space where I feel I'm in community here, right? And I feel connected. So one of the best ways to build a connection is to be supportive of others. And so the theory of reciprocity states that if I do something nice for you, there's a greater likelihood that you're going to do something nice for me. That's just the theory of reciprocity. So altruism and doing something nice for somebody else builds community because in the future, when I need something, those people will remember that I did for them, not in a I do this for you, so you'll do this for me. More in I'm doing this for you because I know you need it to be done. And it makes me feel good to help others. And then also in the future, if I need something, hopefully it will happen for me, right? And so that reciprocity is an important aspect as well. Being flexible, and this is a really big one. I mentioned to you about, say, the political things that are happening over in the US, when my belief systems are so not flexible, right, are so rigid, and I'm going to dig my heels in, and I'm not going to even listen to you in terms of a conversation because I think I'm right, that breaks connection, that breaks community, right? I no longer talk to those people, or I no longer spend time with those people because I believe my views are a certain way. I'm being inflexible. When I'm able to relax that a little bit and be able to spend time with people who I know and love, but just not talk about the things that are difficult, I'm able to maintain those relationships. And so recognizing that how flexible we are or not, or inflexible, has an impact on our connection and thus the community that we build. And then being positive. And I already shared with you the science around that, that when you're positive, there's a greater likelihood to build connection and community. So, what are these connections? Well, it's this feeling of being close, being loved and cared for and valued. And it's really the basis of all of our relationships, all of our interpersonal relationships that we have. We've gotten away from it a little bit. And so in order to build community, we have to create spaces where people feel connected and supported. And I want you to just think for a moment about, how do you connect? What are the things that you do to connect? You have to share it. It's just a little bit of a self-awareness, if you will. Okay. I want to share with you this workbook. So this is a workbook that I use a lot when I'm doing in-person training. But in this workbook, there's 100 different ways to create happiness in your life through connection, support, capital. And I'm going to share with you some of the examples moving forward. One of them is this called an ecogram, or a social support gram. And this is a tool that you can use when you're talking to somebody who is particularly isolated or feeling particularly isolated. And so the way that this would work is you would say, say you put my name right there in the middle, Julie, and then you're going to, in these different colored circles, you're going to think about, what are different aspects of my life, and who are, or what are my connections in those spaces. So for example, let's say we're talking here about school, and you would say, okay, Julie, if you're at school and you're feeling lonely or sad, who would you talk to? And I might say, my friend that goes to school. I might say my teacher. I might say nobody. I might say, if I'm feeling lonely, I'm not going to talk to anybody at school, because I wouldn't talk about them. Then you say in your home. If you're at home and you're feeling lonely or isolated, who would you talk to? And I might say I could talk to my mom or my dog, or I might say nobody, that we don't talk about that in my household. Then you could say in your neighborhood, if you're in your neighborhood and you're feeling a little bit down, who would you talk to? And I might say, oh, I have a neighbor, a block over, or I might say nobody. I don't really know my neighbors, or I don't really talk to my neighbors. Your extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, people who do not live in your home, who would you talk to? And I might say, oh, I could call my grandma, or I might talk to my cousin. Or maybe nobody. Maybe we don't discuss that in my family. How about in your faith community? If you are feeling sad, was there somebody within your faith community that you might talk to? And most people will say not really, because most faith communities are not, these days, welcoming. But maybe there's a pastor that you would talk to if you're feeling that way. Then it could be, if you work in your workspace, or are you part of a club or a team in that space? In your friend circle, is there somebody you would talk to? Right. And so you go circle by circle by circle, and domain by domain by domain, asking, if you were feeling a certain way, who would you talk to? So from an activity like this, what you find out as one of two things. Either one, people do have more support than they realize, right? There are people that they could talk to in their life. Maybe it's just hard for them to ask for help. So then that becomes the work that we do is, okay, how do you ask for help? Let's practice that, or let's figure out how we can do that. The other thing that you might find out is that people don't have connections. They don't feel that there are people in their life that they can talk to. And so from, a research perspective, if everywhere you go, you don't feel connected or you don't feel like you have support, if every day you go to school and every time you're at your house and every time you're walking in your neighborhood and every time you're with your extended family and every time you're at church or in your faith community, your mosque or your synagogue, if every time, right, if every time you're spending time with your friends and every time you everywhere you go, you do not feel connected, how would you feel? Lonely, isolated, right? So, we look at those feelings and say, well, that's a mental health condition, when in reality, it's a social condition, right? It's the way that it's how we're not connecting with people and how we can do that differently or better so that we can build the community that we're looking to build. So, what are some of the ways to build these connections? Well, one is to attend to our existing relationships. Maybe there are people in our lives that we're just not spending enough time with. And by virtue of being intentional about spending time with people, we can begin to build those communities and make that connection again. Another is to identify what your interests are, right? So, what are the things that you like to do? What are the things where you can meet other connections? Excuse me. So participating in those activities that you like and that you're interested in, knowing that when you go there, other people are interested in the same thing. Another is reciprocity. So doing good things for other people will help that process. Taking risks, right? So if you're not exactly sure, sorry. If you're not exactly sure where you can meet people, go to the park and just kind of check it out, or see if there's a club and activity happening and choose to participate in it. Like make that effort to see what it's like and if you can meet people that way. But participate in things that are happening in the community, whether it's music or a health fair or something like that. And then you can always do things like support groups or professional help if you need it, right? But so building those connections helps you to build your community. So I wanted to share this activity with you as, again, I'm all about self-awareness and being aware of what are the things that are happening in your world that you have control over. So I'm going to ask you to take out your smartphones for just a moment. It's definitely more fun when we're communicating and interacting, but since we're on this platform, I'll just instruct you how to do this activity on your own. And I want you to, if you have an Apple, I want you to go to, it's under screen time. Oh, it's under settings. And if you scroll down, you'll see something that says screen time. It's about halfway, like the third block down, third or fourth. If you're on an Android and you go to your settings, it's under digital well-being. You'll see that line, right? And if you hit that section, either screen time or digital well-being, it will give you an average, right? Usually it gives you your daily average, and there should be a number there. And so we're going to do just a little bit of math. So take your number, whatever your number is right there, and then we're going to do the math. So my number is 5. And now I'm going to multiply that number by 7 because there's 7 days in a week. And then I'm going to multiply that number by 52 because there's 52 weeks in a year. Then I'm going to divide that number by 24 because there's 24 hours in a day. And then I'm going to divide that number by 30 because there's about 30 days in a month, give or take. And so my number is 2.5. So what that means is out of an entire year, I spend 2.5 months on this device. Like 2.5 complete months, 24 hours a day, 2.5 months on this device. Now, in my own defense, I listen to meditation every night. And so it usually takes me about 5 minutes to fall asleep, but the meditation goes on for an hour or so, however long the meditation is. I use GPS to drive. Like everywhere I go, I pretty much put GPS on. That's also included in there. The emails, the texts, if you listen to music, music is included in your screen time, or your digital well-being time. If you're watching any kind of videos, as well as social media platforms. So this information, this number, it's just not the end all be all. It's not like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much time, it's terrible. When we use our smartphone as a tool, and we're aware of what we're using it for, that's information for us. Now, if my number is, say, 4, and it says that I spend 4 months out of every year on my phone, and I'm feeling a little lonely or isolated or depressed or anxious, well, I need to pay attention to what am I doing on my phone and figure out how can I decrease some of those. This is an individual activity, something that you can use yourself, but also share it with others. Share it with that, I used it with my kids, and we sat down and I was like, let's look at this. And it turns out I spend more time on my phone than they do. Right? So it was a great awareness because in my mind, oh my gosh, they're spending so much time on their phones. But in reality, they're spending time on their phones when they're having downtime, which is a whole nother challenge. Because for young people, the phone tends to be what we call their third space. It's become their community, right? And so that was a whole nother conversation about, okay, maybe you guys are not on the phone as much as I thought. However, anytime you have downtime, that's where you go, is to your phone instead of building, opportunities to spend time with others. And so if this activity is a great tool to have a conversation with people around how much time they spend on the phone, right? And what are they doing with it? But not in a way of like you have to make a change, just in a way of be aware of this is something that's happening, impacting all of us. And then is there some change you want to make towards it, right? Which would be great if people can learn something and make a change. So some important points to consider. One is our culture plays an important part in how we connect with people, how we build community, right? Again, for our young people, the technology tends to be a way that they build community. We need to encourage them, fine, use your phone to make a plan to spend time in person. Right? That's what we want to be using our phones for, not just being on our phones and living on our phones. Recognizing that relationships are dynamic. And so today I'm your best friend, tomorrow we're not talking, then there's hope that we could be friends again. Right. Same thing with family. Right now, I'm kind of in a little bit of an argument with my sister, but I know that at some point we'll sit down and talk it through, and then we'll be fine again, or whatever that looks like for you. Right. The way to build community, the number one way to build community is through shared activities, whether it's through groups or clubs or faith communities, our interests, whether it's the schools we go to or the workplaces we go to. That's where we're going to build our community, is through the things that we do every day or the things that we like to do and we want to do. And so being aware of those things for yourself, and then creating opportunities to do those things so you can be around others, which is really important. And the other thing I think that's really important for people to realize is it doesn't happen overnight. You don't just say, okay, I really need to build friends. I like art. I'm just going to go to an art class and build instant community. The research demonstrates that you have to spend like 80 hours with somebody to truly call them a friend, and 200 hours with somebody to call them a best friend. And so it doesn't happen overnight. We don't have this instant gratification. I think that's one of the reasons our young people are struggling so much is they're so used to instant gratification. And it takes a while to get to know somebody and to actually really be able to call them a friend, but it starts with small gestures. So during COVID, I've lived in my neighborhood for 25 years. And during COVID, and I have nice neighbors, but we all are very busy with our work and our families. I have one neighbor that lives two doors down. We have children the exact same age, but we never really got our children together. They went to different schools, and we were both working, and whatnot. And so, during COVID, I would get up in the morning really early and walk. And so I would be walking around the neighborhood, and I noticed she was walking around the neighborhood too. And so we would wave at each other, and then eventually we noticed we were always both walking really early in the morning around the same time every day. So we started like talking. And so she would be on one side of the street and I would be on the other because we were respecting the 6 foot thing. But we started having conversations. And then we started texting and saying, like, hey, I'm going out in 5 minutes, meet you there. Right. So we would begin to plan for it. Then we would, I would say like, oh, hey, do you want to go when a lot of the COVID stuff was lifted, you want to go grab a coffee? And we started doing that. And now we're really good friends. But we had lived together in the same neighborhood for 20 years prior to that happening. It started with the wave and then walking near each other and then talking, right? And so now we're good friends, but it took a long time to get there, right? So starts with small gestures. We have to start somewhere. And that's the important thing. If you're feeling like you have a lack of community, you have to start somewhere. So what can we do? Well, use the power of connection. Understand it. You all have this information now. So now you can use it to build community. Invest time in others. Put this thing away when you're with people, don't use it, right? So don't if you ever see people at a restaurant and everybody's sitting around the table on their phones. No, when you're together, put the phone in the center of the table. The first one to grab the phone is the one that buys the next, appetizer or something. Look for opportunities to help others and serve others because that builds that theory of reciprocity, but you also feel good when you're doing it. Practice gratitude because we know that that's one of the things that makes the happiest people in this world. Talk to people from different backgrounds, right? The more you understand how other people live, the easier it is to build connections. Participate in your local community groups, anything you can do to build support and connection where you live, because the theory of proximity says that those people are more likely to connect with us. And there's always help, if you need help, you could find some kind of support or help. And so this is my information. Speaking of being connected, if you want to connect with me or follow me through social media, happy to communicate that way. And I think we have a few minutes for questions.